Welcome to the next episode of Industry Matters Respiratory Edition. I'm Boone Lockard, VP of Clinical Services here at VGM, and today my guest is Kevin Myers, Account Manager of Resupply with Brightree. Kevin, welcome.
Thanks, Boone. It's good to be
Yeah,
here. Thanks for having me.
definitely. Kevin, tell us a little bit about your background and how we got here today.
Yeah, absolutely. Boone, I've been with Brightree for about 7 months. I was brought over from ResMed, where I spent 5 years selling ResMed resupply to DMEs across North America. So we recently launched a new product over here at Brightree that's aimed at the non-Brightree market, very similar to what we were doing over at ResMed. So it made natural sense when, we're talking about this transition to that non-Brightree market to bring me over to Brightree to try to help make this product successful. So here I am. I'm excited to be talking to you guys today about the resupply portfolio over here at Brightree.
Awesome. Well, let's get this started. Kevin, let's just start with the basics. Let's talk about the resupply
Yep.
process in general, where our members, the audience here, can get started, and things to look for, I think is going to be the common theme of today's podcast.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of things to talk about when it comes to resupply, but really, I always love to kind of boil it down to the importance, the value, and the benefits of having a resupply program for DME. And the biggest thing that I come down to is patient choice. I mean, there's a really interesting survey circulating online right now that shows that about 6 out of 10 patients who are not invited to participate in the program wish that they had been. And I think that really highlights that in the modern DME world, patients want more choice in how and when they're outreached, right? They don't want to wait for business hours or for someone to be available in their HME to take their order. They want to be empowered. When they want to be able to take control of their own resupply when it works for them. And really a good byproduct of that too is that patients that have a choice in how and when they're resupplied are more likely to respond positively when outreached. So I think patient choice is a really big topic today when it comes to resupply. Another one, Boone, is patient experience. So I feel like elevating the patient experience by offering more choice, that really can reduce manual errors and really set one HME apart from another, right? In some geographies, patients may have more than one HME to offer therapy, and some patients may choose one HME over the other, right? If they hear from a family or a friend about a positive experience that they've had with a modern DME, and I'm thinking about myself, right? If I was given a choice to work with a DME that didn't have a resupply program versus one that did and that was more forward thinking, I think I'd probably, maybe be leaning more toward, that more modern approach when it comes to resupply. Another big one, Boone, is revenue, right? I mean, obviously therapy is important, but revenue is as well. Like patient health is vital, but you can't forget that resupply is a revenue generating business, right? For any HME that's not focusing on resupply, it's a way to create a new revenue stream in times when they're facing, decline in device reimbursements. That's obviously prevalent in CPAP. Another round of competitive bidding that's coming up, that's going to be big too, right? And HMEs really need to kind of like tighten things up and find ways for new revenue streams to help keep the lights on. And focusing on optimizing resupply is a big way to do that. Now, I did touch on, therapy and how important that is. Obviously, there's another really neat independent study that I talked to HMEs about quite a bit. It's the Benjafeld study, but it really kind of highlights how frequent resupply can increase therapy duration. And then with therapy duration, obviously better therapy outcomes. And that's really important for other chronic diseases that can be tied to CPAP, right? Fresh supplies can make therapy more comfortable and tolerable, and that can also really help reduce the risk of chronic conditions that could develop while on therapy. Automation, that means more time with patients, which can reduce attrition. That's a big thing, big indicator that we watch. And Brightree has some really cool features to kind of help predict attrition that I'm going to get to a little later in the podcast. So, just thinking about, the process and what I feel is important, those are what I really kind of feel resonates when I meet with HMEs to talk about resupply.
When you mentioned just keeping up with supplies to prevent that attrition rate, I mean, I think that's something we see as in the industry as a in general, right? If somebody's mask is leaking, it's bothersome to
Yeah.
them. The chances of them falling off therapy are a lot higher than somebody who is getting those new supplies. Cushions aren't leaking, they're not having issues with the product or the therapy in the middle of the night, which can be a huge pain point to patients. So from a best practices perspective, any ideas around improving resupply metrics or how to improve your business without necessarily seeing an increase in spend to manage those patients?
Yeah, there's lots of things that a DME could focus on without spending a dime. Like number one, if there's a way that you can dedicate one of your staff members or a couple of your staff members for resupply, that's super important because staff who become familiar with the tools and the processes become proficient in them, and that means less chance of errors, right? So if there's a way that you can get that focus, that's really going to help resupply big time. Another one that a lot of HMEs don't do is educate patients at setup about resupply. Talk about it. Make sure that you have a pamphlet or something that they can leave with. Talk about how the importance of refreshing supplies on a regular basis, the number of allowable items, the frequency, et cetera. Obviously, it's going to be different by payer, but if you know what the payer guidelines are, then you're able to talk about that with your patient at setup and let them know that they can get a mask every 90 days or they can get a new mask every 120 days, et cetera. So those are big. One other one that they can do without spending a dime is optimize supplies at setup, right? Get the full reimbursement for the patient's first order. Send them home with the maximum number of supplies by payer. That's going to get them familiar with the allowable number of items, deductible amounts, so they're more aware when they reorder and they'll be less surprised, right? When they get determined of what their reimbursement is or what their copay will be, they're less likely to be surprised by that. So those are just a few best practices that an HME can focus on without spending anything. Now, if we get into, automation, et cetera, and obviously that's where we come in with Brightree with our portfolio. Once you automate, there's a few more things that you can do to really kind of help with that. Create a mail campaign to inform your existing patient population about automation. So, when you flip the switch and go live with a new automated solution, when you haven't done that before, the last thing you want is your patients to be caught off guard, right? With that automated call or that email, they may be confused by that. So if you send out a mail campaign to inform them of that, they're going to be more likely to respond positively when outreached, right? The other thing that they can do is they can create a mail campaign focused on non-ordering patients, right? So some patients who fall off therapy or just don't order supplies on a regular basis, they can be revived. So they could potentially run a report of patients who haven't ordered supplies in 18 months or beyond, and then take that percentage of patients and try to come up with a campaign to revive them, to get them ordering again, right? So that's a good best practice, Boone. Asking your patients that setup, how they want to be contacted. Kevin, how do you want to be contacted when you're eligible to replace your mask? I'd like an email. Great. We'll send you an email whenever you're eligible. That way I'm going to be more likely to respond positively when I get that email. So that's a big one. At setup, they could play a clip of the IVR, the interactive voice response system. So that automated call, play a clip at setup, have a little snippet so that your patients will be more responsive when they get that call on their phone. They'll be, oh yeah, that's right. Boone played that clip for me. I know this is the resupply call. I'm going to answer that and I'm going to go through the questions they ask me. All right. So that's a big one. Another one at setup, ask for text consent if it's okay for your patients to be sent a text when they're eligible, right? Obviously, in this day and age, more and more patients are responding to texts. So to get that consent early on in the process, that's going to really kind of improve your hit rate when it comes to resupply. And then one last one, at setup, ask your patient if it's okay for you to program a number on their phone, the 800 number that the auto dialer does for those IVR calls, and label it, ABCDME. So when they get those calls, those automated calls, that's the number that's going to come up on their phone, and they're going to be familiar with that name because it's their DME's name, and they're going to answer it, and they're going to not think that it's a spam call. So those are a few, but I'm going to tell you one more that I think is really important, and this is really important when it comes to fulfillment, is use a partner, right? This helps patients get supplies. This helps us get supplies in the hands of patients sooner to improve therapy adherence. So obviously with great partners like VGM, they are experts when it comes to fulfillment. So DMEs not having to focus on ordering and inventory management and carrying costs of supplies, that can free up valuable time and help HME save money. Drop shipping can be an added expense. We know that, right? But when you optimize resupply, the chances of an increase in the number of orders and the number of items per box could really help offset some of the extra costs that it comes to using a fulfillment partner. So those are some really, really good best practices that I talk to my customers about, Boone, when I'm talking about resupply. And hopefully some of the folks on the call will be able to resonate with some of those and maybe be able to introduce some of those into their workflows.
When Just kind of going back to a few of those points. So you mentioned getting text consent or getting an email on file for that patient when you're in the middle of that setup or in that intake phase. I mean, it really comes down to meeting that patient where they want to be met at, right? Maybe they don't want a live call or an IVR call coming out to them. Maybe they do just want that simple text message. I mean, right now, if we were in the middle of recording this podcast and somebody sent me a text, I won't be rude, Kevin, and answer that. But if somebody was going to send me a text when I'm in the middle of a meeting, right, I'm more apt to answer or respond to that than I would be. Obviously, I can't take a live call right now, but it's once again, just meeting that patient where they're at. The second side of this, it reminds me to another conversation that I was just having with one of our members the other day about they were trying to find that new revenue line, that new revenue stream from their patient base. And obviously resupply, I always tell our members, I joke about this, that resupply is what we're all going to retire on in that respiratory space. It's that recurring revenue that we can maximize to the best of our abilities. And one of the pieces of that conversation was around, okay, well, I create all these orders, now what? And that's when we talked about fulfillment partners and that from that standpoint, not having to manage that inventory, not carrying thousands of dollars worth of inventory at one time. And then the other thing is just back order situations, things along those lines that we're able to prevent with a fulfillment partner, whether that be VGM or another one that's out there in the market. Appreciate the plug though. What about technology in this space? So we've kind of touched on this here a little bit, but what do you see from a technology standpoint coming into that resupply piece of our business?
Yeah, great topic. Obviously, one that's ever changing with evolution and the things that are offered in the marketplace. Our entire portfolio here at Brightree, we offer multiple inbound and outbound modalities to reach patients, right? And we do offer a resupply platform for any HME, regardless of what billing system you're using. So we really wanted to be able to have an offering for any HME, and that was one of the reasons why we created Resupply Essentials for that non-Brightree market. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about some of the target markets before we get into more of the automation, some of the new features that are coming out. But we do have a product called Connect. We call it Brightree Connect, and it's really for small and regional HMEs under 3,500 patients who are using Brightree for billing. So the really big differentiator for Connect is that it offers resupply outreach for multi-therapy. So not just sleep, so it can do resupply for diabetes, incontinence, etc. And Connect can automate the entire resupply process from outreach to fulfillment. So it's a full end-to-end solution for that Brightree market under 3,500 patients. Now, in my space, the platform that I support, Resupply Essentials, it's more for small and regional sleep HMEs under 3,500 patients who are not using Brightree, right? So Resupply Essentials doesn't automate the full resupply lifecycle. We really focus on the automation features around outreach and order generation. So those steps of the process. We do offer some workflow tasks to help with those steps needed for insurance documentation, verification for documentation requirements, etc. We do offer some workflow steps to help with that, but again, we don't have that full end-to-end process integration like Connect does. So keep in mind that, DMEs who do use Essentials, there's still going to be some manual work that they're going to be needed to do on the front end side, getting patient demographic data into Essentials and payer information so that we can calculate eligibility. So we need to get the data in, and then once the outreach and order generation phases happen, and we verify insurance and documentation, the DME is still going to be required and then to take those orders and key them back into their billing system to fulfillment to VGM, et cetera. Or if they just want to, manually ship out their supplies to the post office or have patients come pick them up, et cetera. But we always want to make sure that we level set with the DME and HMEs out there that there is some manual work needed with Resupply Essentials, but it's a solution that a lot of DMEs use. We can help set up the workflows to help them manage those manual processes of the resupply phases. Now, on the high end, we do have a product called Resupply Complete, more formally known as Snap in the marketplace. It's really for regional and national HMEs, 3,500 patients and up, using any billing system. So it does offer a lot of integration when it comes to DMEs using Brightree, But we do have some customers who are not using Brightree that have implemented Snap. And again, we've just helped with those, set up those workflows to help manage some of those manual steps of the process without having the integration back to, let's say, advanced DME or TIMS or Universal or some non-Brightree billing system. But for any HMEs who are really looking to scale their resupply business, I mean, Snap can really reduce employee touches with lots of advanced software processes that really can help monitor orders, performance, and patient eligibility in real time. It's a really high-end solution that can really kind of help, like I say, regional and large DMEs manage their resupply business and scale to handle an infinite amount of patients. So that's the platforms that we have within Brightree for resupply. Now, when it comes to innovation and automation, some of the features, most resupply platforms that are out there today, Boone, do offer contact via email, texting, IVR, that automated call, have an app or a portal for patients to be outreached by. But we have some pretty cool innovative features that really kind of set us apart from our competition. One of the features we have is called an inbound IVR. So this really helps patients be routed to generate an order and not having some DMEs have to have as many staff managing inbound calls. So it frees up valuable time for the staff to be able to manage other aspects of their business, right? They can confirm and ship more orders. RTs can handle more setups. So the inbound IVR is a big differentiator we find for the entire portfolio here at Brightree. Now, there is another feature that we just started using called AI Voice for multilingual IVR. So this is some AI features that are coming in that really can reduce the amount of inbound calls that support reps need to manage. So as a result, our live callers have actually increased outbound calling because they've been able to handle more inbound calls. So we're really seeing an uptick in terms of the amount of outbound calls that our teams can do. And then one last feature that's on the horizon is an AI predictable attrition indicator. Now, I alluded to this earlier in the call about how important managing attrition is when it comes to this business, but this feature will allow HMEs to determine when patients are likely to fall off therapy based on compliance, engagement, their order history, and really allow the HME to be able to take action before therapy termination. So really cool technology that's on the horizon for the products we have here at Brightree for resupply.
Look forward to learning more about that. And just from, I mean, you mentioned Connect, and when I was a provider a long, long time ago, we had moved over to Connect. So I would just say, when you look at these IVR systems, if that's a route that you're going, maybe you're questioning, well, how will my patients take to this? It's kind of punny, but don't sleep on that. If you're telling yourself stories in your head about how your patients will react to an IVR or a text or an email campaign, truly trial it before you tell yourself that your patients aren't going to adopt it. Just, I mean, I came from a super rural area, a DME in a rural area, and we saw tremendous growth when we implemented Connect back in the day. I know there are a lot of other offerings out here nowadays through Brightree, but I guess that's one thing I would leave our listeners with is don't tell yourself stories about how patients will react to a certain form of outreach to them.
Yep, great points.
Is there anything else that you want to leave our listeners with here today before we get going?
Yeah, just I think that it's really important to think about resupply, obviously as a business, right? There's a fantastic opportunity for DMEs that are out there that aren't doing resupply today to really kind of up the ante and find that new revenue stream. I've worked with a few DMEs in the past who haven't done any automation, and I asked them, what method they're doing today, and they come back with the accidental method. And I thought that was a really interesting way to phrase such an important part of their business, right? They said, yeah, well, we just wait for patients to walk in with a worn out mask and we give them a new mask, and then they're on their merry way. And and after I talk about, the opportunity that's in front of them, right? We talk about, reimbursement, the opportunity to increase the number of items per box, the number of, you think about how many patients could supply on a more frequent basis if they knew what their payer allowed in terms of eligibility. So, that's a big green light for some new customers that are thinking about automation, that are on the fence. So really thinking about, the business aspects of it, but most importantly, we know that patients who are diagnosed with sleep apnea, they have it for life, right? So being able to come up with a solution that's going to be able to help get supplies in the hands of patients on a regular basis, that's going to improve their therapy, that's going to help with any comorbidities that may exist, right? And any comorbidities that could be on the horizon, right? Sleep is super important. We know that. So figuring out ways to get supplies in the hands of patients on a regular basis is going to help with that, and it's going to help save lives. So I think resupply is not just something that DME should be thinking about from a business perspective, but also so important when it comes to, the life and the longevity of patients who are struggling with sleep
And the
apnea.
other side of that, we're not educating these patients on how often they can get new supplies. I think of this similar to like retail sales items, CPAP pillows, cleaners, mask wipes, things along those lines. If we don't educate these patients about that, they don't know about it, and they're probably going to go online to find this. So if we educate them on the front end of how many cushions they're eligible for per their insurance every so often, or whatever that looks like, I mean, we're almost doing a not a disservice, but we're not doing them any favors by not educating them on this is what your insurance allows and this is what you're don't like to use the word entitled, but entitled to per your insurance. So it's an education thing, right? I think we can both agree on that. But no, I appreciate that insight. And we will be following up with this podcast with another edition where we'll talk more about the metrics of resupply and softwares and integrating that. But Kevin, I appreciate your time. Kevin, if somebody wants to reach out to you in the meantime before our next episode, where can they reach you at?
Yeah, absolutely. I can be reached at kevin.myers, Myers, at brightree.com. Really thanks, Boone, for having me on the podcast today. This is fantastic. It's always great to talk about resupply. I'm really an evangelist when it comes to the process. And, I look forward to any interest from any of the listeners. And I look forward to getting another podcast with VGM sometime in the
Kevin, we
future.
appreciate it. We'll see you next time.
All right,
Bye.
Boone, take care.